Welcome to Return of Mount Hua Sect, episode 91, where we've taken a perfectly respectable martial arts story and sprinkled in some extra laughs, spicy jokes, and a healthy dose of WTF. These are the revised editions, keeping all the badass action intact while making sure you laugh so hard you'll question your life choices. Buckle up, because today we've got more shade than a beach umbrella, more kicks than a bad Tinder date, and a disciple with a mouth sharper than a katana. Get ready for the sass, the slapdowns, and, oh yeah, there might be some martial arts too. Let's dive in. Episode 91. If you lose to those bastards, you lose everything. 1. The disciples of Mount Hua, who were exhausted and on the verge of collapse from running, came to a hurried stop. Unfortunately for them, they happened to stop right as the Southern Edge sect arrived at the same location. Standing next to the third-class disciples, who were gasping and panting for air, Chung Myung awkwardly tilted his head and looked at Sama Sung. Me? A face that didn't seem to understand anything. Seeing the child's attempt to act innocent, Sama Sung asked again. I asked you, what did you just say? Oh, that. Instead of answering, Chung Myung kicked the already staggering Jo Gul's shin. Ack! Fuck you! Do you have a death wish? Can't you run straight? I am your Sahyung, you jerk! Ah, I forgot for a second there. Chung Myung scratched his head and grinned at Sama Sung. That must be what you heard. So embarrassing. Sama Sung glared at Chung Myung with venom dripping from his gaze. Sama Sung was not stupid enough to misunderstand who those words were directed at. There was no way he would be deceived by a child and his antics. At that moment, someone gently tugged on Sama Sung's sleeve. At this, he stopped himself from speaking and glanced back. It was Jin Jumryong. Elder, nothing good can come from arguing with a child. Sama Sung sighed and nodded. No matter how angry he was an elder of the Southern Edge sect. The difference in status was too great for him to speak to a child. If rumors spread that a third-class disciple from Mount Hua and an elder from the Southern Edge sect engaged in an argument, it would disgrace his name. Jin Gumryong stepped forward. Who is this young disciple? Who am I? Would you even know if I told you? Jin Gumryong looked at Chung Myung with blank eyes. He had never before met anyone who answered him with a question like this. Feeling beyond upset, he calmed himself and smiled. Perhaps I might know you, so why don't you tell me? Well, it isn't difficult. I am Chung Myung. Chung Myung? Jin Gumryong's smiling face immediately went stiff. It was a familiar name. Wasn't Chung Myung the name of the Mount Hua disciple that humiliated the Southern Edge sect? Jin Gumryong narrowed his eyes and looked at Chung Myung. He's younger than I thought. He thought it was absurd. Thanks to Chung Myung curing Elder Wang, the Yuna Guild severed their relationship with the Southern Edge sect and began supporting Mount Hua. It was such an embarrassment that the Southern Edge sect refused to discuss the matter. Even more so because Mount Hua was at its center. Thanks to that, the elders and the sect leader were furious. But the one that caused such shame to fall upon the sect was this young child? I see. Disciple Chung Myung, but it seems like Disciple Chung Myung never learned proper manners. Although it was an outright rebuke at his attitude, Chung Myung picked his ears and whistled. I'm sorry, but I can't hear you very well. Could you come closer and speak up a bit? What did you say? Are you deaf? Come closer and talk to me. Can't you hear? Jin Gumryong's face hardened. Just what the hell does this kid believe in? If what Lee Song-baek said was true, this child was knocked back after one strike. This child had little training in martial arts. What did he believe in that gave him the confidence to speak such nonsense? As the Southern Edge sect disciples continued to walk away, the tension in the air thickened around the remaining disciples of Mount Hua. Chung Myung's fiery words echoed in their minds, igniting a mix of fear and determination. Why are you all looking like you've seen a ghost? Chung Myung snapped, eyes still blazing with fury. Did you forget what we're here for? We're not here to make friends with those Southern Edge bastards. But Chung Myung, Jo Gul stammered, still nursing his shin. They're a powerful sect. We can't just go around picking fights with them. Powerful? What kind of power can come from such arrogance? Chung Myung shot back, his voice rising. They think their strength gives them the right to look down on us. If we let them walk all over us now, we'll never earn respect again. We'll be nothing but stepping stones for their arrogance. Still, we have to be careful, Yunjong interjected, trying to calm the storm brewing within Chengmyung. Careful? Careful won't win us this fight, Chengmyung shouted, taking a step closer to Yunjong, his face a mask of determination. Look at us. We've trained hard. We've come a long way. If we lose to them, it won't just be about losing a match. It'll be about losing our dignity and everything we've worked for. The other disciples exchanged nervous glances, feeling the weight of Chengmyung's words. The fire in his eyes was infectious, and despite their apprehension, they couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope ignite within them. Remember, we're Mount Hua, Chengmyung declared, raising his fist in defiance. We were once the peak of martial arts, and we can be again. We just need to stand our ground and show them that we're not to be underestimated. Zhou Gul hesitated, glancing at the retreating figures of the Southern Edge sect disciples. But what if they come back stronger? What if they decide to retaliate? Chengmyung smirked, an almost playful glint in his eyes. Then we'll be ready. We've got the element of surprise on our side. Let them think they can push us around. Let them think they can bully us. But they'll soon learn that Mount Hua doesn't go down without a fight. Yeah, Yunjong chimed in, a determined smile breaking through his earlier anxiety. If we stick together, we can face whatever they throw at us. Exactly, Chengmyung grinned, feeling the energy shift among his fellow disciples. Now, let's train harder than ever. We need to be prepared for anything they throw our way. As they nodded in agreement, Chengmyung's fiery resolve began to seep into them, fueling their spirits. Each disciple felt their heart race with newfound determination as they shared the promise of standing united against any challenge. Meanwhile, the Southern Edge sect disciples continued their path, but the atmosphere was tense. Jinjum Ryong couldn't shake off the memory of that audacious child. Do you think we should have just ignored him? He muttered, frustration lacing his tone. Samasung, still contemplating, replied, ignoring him would have been easier, yes, but he's not just any child. He's a threat. He might not have the strength now, but that fire in his eyes, he's dangerous in a way we can't overlook. Dangerous? He's just a brat with a big mouth, Jin Jemryong scoffed, though unease settled in his gut. Perhaps, Samasung conceded. But remember, the most unpredictable flames can burn the fiercest. Underestimating him could lead to our downfall. As they approached their temporary lodgings, Samasung's mind raced with strategies. This conference was supposed to be a step toward unification, but with the likes of Chengmyung stirring the pot, it could easily escalate into a full-blown conflict. Get ready for the unexpected, he warned the disciples. We need to be cautious. A single spark can ignite a fire. Back at Mount Hua, Chengmyung and the others were already putting plans into motion. With fervor and excitement, they gathered in their training grounds, determined to turn their fears into strengths. All right, Sahyungs, we're going to train hard, and I mean hard. No more coddling. We're going all out. Chengmyung shouted, his voice ringing through the air. Let's show them what Mount Hua is made of. Yunjong shouted, leading the charge. With each passing hour, the disciples pushed their limits. Sweat dripped down their brows, muscles burned, and their resolve grew stronger. The earlier fears began to fade, the depth replaced by a sense of purpose and camaraderie. In the depths of the Southern Edge sect, the atmosphere was tense too. The elders gathered, plotting their next moves. Chengmyung is a thorn in our side, Jin Gemryong said, his irritation evident. We can't let his arrogance go unpunished. Samasung nodded thoughtfully. We'll have to turn their enthusiasm into despair. Let's show them the consequences of defiance. As the two sects prepared for the inevitable clash, the air was charged with anticipation, and the stakes rose higher. The tides of destiny were turning, and neither side was willing to back down. In the hearts of the Mount Hua disciples, they carried a burning hope, while the Southern Edge sect harbored a cold determination. The storm was coming, and both sides were ready to unleash their fury. Episode 92. If you lose to those bastards, you lose everything. Samasung sat across from Mount Hua's sect leader, Hyunjong, carefully observing him. Hyunjong was the man who somehow managed to hold together the crumbling fragments of Mount Hua, preventing a total collapse of the sect. The sect leader of the Southern Edge sect had once evaluated Hyunjong as someone who might have excelled in his position, if only the circumstances hadn't been so disastrous. That's an over-evaluation, Samasung thought. Hyunjong had never shown any extraordinary skills to warrant praise. Sure, anyone who was willing to grind themselves to dust for their responsibilities might get a nod, but sacrificing your life and being good at your job are not the same thing. However, greatness isn't judged by character alone, but by achievements, he mused. Samasung shifted his gaze around the room. To the left and right of Hyunjong sat the heads of martial arts and finance. The undisciples, including Unam and Ungeum, were seated as well. All of Mount Hua's major figures had gathered to welcome him. This wasn't the first time he had seen this lineup, but this time, something felt different. Last time, everyone looked like they were one bad day away from packing up and disappearing into the woods. But now, they looked relaxed, almost carefree. I don't like this, Samasung thought, his eyes narrowing. No matter what had sparked this new sense of confidence, whether it was money or martial arts, it was nothing more than delusional bravado. Mount Hua was destined to fall, no matter how much tea and smiles they passed around. If they thought they were about to pull off some Rocky-level comeback, they had another thing coming. Hyunjong broke the silence. I'm not sure if you'll enjoy the tea. Samasung lightly nodded. It has a deep fragrance. I'm glad you like it. Samasung smiled. It indeed has a deep fragrance, but I've never been one for the scent of plum blossoms. Hyunjong's eyebrows raised slightly. He quickly recovered, though, and responded softly. Is there a reason? There are many scents in the forest. The smell of soil, trees, even the dew on the leaves. But when the plum blossoms bloom, their scent overwhelms everything. It's so thick, it suffocates everything else around it. Just like Mount Hua in the past. The world works best when everyone lives together in harmony. That's why I prefer the subtle scent of green tea over the plum blossom, which rudely drowns everything else out. Samasung's words were polite, but the undisciples couldn't hide their flushed faces. This was nothing short of a backhanded slap, an indirect criticism of Mount Hua's past arrogance. But the elders of Mount Hua took it differently. Does he mean that, back when Mount Hua had dominance, we refused to coexist peacefully with others? Great. This meeting was about to turn into an old grudges reunion tour. Hyunjong, though, remained calm. He knew respect only went as far as power did. And in this room, the Southern Edge sect held the upper hand. Samasung could say whatever he wanted, and there was nothing Mount Hua could do about it. Sect leader. Samasung finally broke the tension. Speak, Hyunjong replied. We in the Southern Edge sect have no intention of holding any more of these conferences after this one. Hyunjong frowned. May I ask why? Simple. Samasung smiled like a man who enjoyed making others miserable. Because the exchange between our sects no longer benefits the Southern Edge sect. The gap between us is too wide to bridge. Oof. There's a line between confident and cocky, and Samasung just sprinted across it. Hyunjong closed his eyes. Hearing those words, coupled with that smug look on Samasung's face, was almost too much. Even the elders beside him were visibly struggling to contain their rage. This bastard. Hyunyoung's beard trembled, and his fists clenched beneath the table. It was a good thing this was a formal meeting, or he might have introduced Samasung's face to Mount Hua's stone floors. Hyunjong slowly opened his eyes. The conference isn't just about development. Its purpose is to foster friendship between our two sects. Isn't that just a facade? Samasung cut him off. Damn, this guy had zero chill. Hyunyoung was ready to leap out of his chair, but Hyunsang pressed down on his knee, begging him to stay calm. It was no secret that Mount Hua and the Southern Edge sect were like oil and water. They never mixed well. But even so, this level of disrespect was out of line. Samasung knew exactly what he was doing. The Southern Edge sect and Mount Hua have never gotten along. In fact, we're closer to being enemies, aren't we? I'm sure that many in this room would love nothing more than to rip me apart and chew on my bones. It's not that bad, Hyunjong said, trying to maintain some semblance of diplomacy. Really? Then does anyone here have any good feelings toward the Southern Edge sect? No one answered. Because why lie? Everyone in the room hated the Southern Edge sect's guts, and Samasung knew it. There is nothing more futile than trying to reconnect a thread that has already been severed. Samasung's voice was calm, but his words hit like a hammer. He wasn't just speaking for himself. His tone made it clear this was the decision of the entire Southern Edge sect. They weren't just stepping on Mount Hua. They were declaring that they no longer even considered Mount Hua worth competing with. It was disgraceful, humiliating. And when no one dared to speak, Unam finally stepped in. Isn't this a bit too sudden? It should have been done long ago. Unam didn't back down. Elder, do you truly believe Mount Hua is unworthy to stand beside the Southern Edge sect? Samasung smirked. Do you? Unam went silent. What could he say? I think the Southern Edge sect has been incredibly generous with Mount Hua until now, Samasung continued. We've held every conference here at your convenience, and even offered financial support, yet you still accuse us of wrongdoing? Unam ground his teeth. It was all a lie. Southern Edge hosted the conferences at Mount Hua just to mock them, and their so-called support was nothing but an excuse to keep them in check. Samasung wasn't done yet. He looked straight at Hunjong and said, Sect leader, it might be hard to grasp now, but let me make it simple. Once you see the results of this conference, you will be the one begging for it to never happen again. Think hard about what's best for your children if you don't want them crushed. With that, Samasung stood up. The mood in the room shifted sharply. He left without letting anything disrupt his smooth swagger, as if he just dropped some profound wisdom rather than a nuclear insult. Hunjong, holding on to the last vestiges of his patience, asked, Is this truly the path the Southern Edge sect has chosen? Samasung stopped, his back still turned to the room. He slowly twisted his head around, just enough to glance back at Hunjong. His face was blank, giving nothing away. That isn't up to me. And with that, the elder from Southern Edge sect left the room, leaving a thick fog of frustration and humiliation behind him. As the door slammed shut, Hyun-young couldn't contain his rage any longer. How can they say such a thing? His fist slammed the table, hard enough to send cracks splintering through the wood. That table was as shattered as their pride. Nobody had the heart to blame him for losing his temper. Honestly, who wouldn't? Ungeam, usually the calm and collected one, spoke with a heavy tone. They've always been aggressive, but this time, this was vicious. That's right. They've gone too far, another elder growled. Who does that elder think he is? Speaking to our sect leader like that? They should have sent someone higher to deliver such news. A mere elder doesn't have the authority for this kind of decision, someone else chimed in. They were furious. Voices overlapping in a wave of anger. Each elder added to the growing list of grievances, feeding off each other's rage like a pack of wolves circling a fresh kill. In the midst of the chaos, Hunjong quietly shook his head, sadness replacing the anger that had flashed in his eyes earlier. Leave it alone, he said, his voice weary. But sect leader, Unam protested. Sometimes words are just words. Even if we speak now, would it change anything? Hyunjong's shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of the world pressed down on him. Unam bowed his head, and the rest of the room followed suit. There were no words left that could relieve the bitter taste in their mouths. I can tolerate any amount of disgrace. Hell, they could spit in my face, and I'd smile right back at them. Hyunjong's voice was calm but full of pain. That's not what concerns me. Then what does concern you? Unam asked hesitantly. The children, Hyunjong said softly. I'm worried about the children. Unam's eyes trembled. Seeing the confidence with which they spoke, it's clear that this conference will be the most difficult one yet. I can endure the insults they throw at me, but what if our children have to endure the same humiliation? What if they're crushed under the weight of this challenge? Hyunjong's face turned bitter. Being the leader of a crumbling sect came with burdens no one else could understand. Unam's throat tightened. He wanted to suggest they cancel the conference now before it was too late, but the thought of the children and their pride stopped him. In martial arts, giving up without a fight was like admitting you were soft, so soft you might as well melt into a puddle. Asking the disciples to quit now would be a stain on their honor that would haunt them forever. My sins are too great, Hyunjong sighed deeply, the sorrow evident in his voice. No one could think of anything to say to comfort him. The room fell into silence, thick with tension and unspoken fears. Finally, Un Jeum, who had been silently observing, spoke up. Sect leader, there's no need to think that way. Hyunjong turned to him, eyes filled with uncertainty. They want to show the world that the gap between Southern Edge and Mount Hua is so vast that we no longer belong in the same league. They're aiming to deliver a final blow that will ruin our reputation, not just in this region, but across the martial world. That's why they're pushing so hard. That's true, Hyunjong acknowledged. But we've run out of tricks. Ungiam's lips curled into a small smile. We don't need tricks. We've got something better. We've got hope. Hope? Hyunjong raised an eyebrow. Yes, trust the children. They've come further than we expected. Maybe we'll be surprised. Hyunjong remained silent, but the glimmer of hope in Unjeom's eyes planted a small seed of optimism in the room. Unjeom smiled as everyone else looked at him with doubt and suspicion. Now it's your turn to prove yourself, Chungmyung. Inside the Blue Plum dorms where the guests were housed, a strange atmosphere had settled. Sitting in the center chair, Jin Jomryong narrowed his eyes and mumbled. I don't like this. He had just finished his meal. A well-organized housing with mouth-watering food was the perfect way to fill the weary hearts and empty stomachs of those who had just climbed the mountain. But that very fact was off-putting to Jin Gumryong. Did they find a vein of gold somewhere? Mount Hua had to be inferior to the Southern Edge sect in every aspect. He knew that there was no comparison between Mount Hua and Southern Edge's wealth. Nevertheless, seeing that the gap had narrowed left Jin Jumryong displeased. Jong Sohan glanced at him and smiled awkwardly. Great, Jong thought. Nothing like a leader who gets pissed because someone else upgraded from ramen to steak. Jin Jumryong was normally a very gentle person. However, if one judged his true character to be gentle, they would be fooled. The Jin Jumryong that Jong Sohan knew was like the sea. The sea calmly embraces everyone, but it turns to a wild maelstrom that swallows everything when angered. Jin Jumryong was precisely like that. He was usually gentle, but he would become genuinely terrifying when angry. Jong Sohan smiled awkwardly and said, It seems like Mount Hua has a bit of money now, Great Sahyang. But in the end, aren't martial arts the most important thing? Even if they dress in fancy silk and eat luxurious meals, it doesn't mean anything if they lack the martial might to support themselves. That is true. Jin Gemryong slowly got up and looked at the Sahyungs there. But, he spoke in a voice loud enough for all to hear, all I want is a complete victory. Everyone held their breath. Fame, wealth, martial arts, a complete victory where we exceed them in all facets. Otherwise, there is no meaning. If there is an opening left for Mount Hua to be compared to us, then it is a disgrace to the Southern Edge sect. Did you forget? Our generation must make our sect into the greatest. A powerful determination shone in the eyes of the second-class disciples. Keep yourselves controlled. The way you all relax as if you're here on a refreshing holiday makes me sick. Don't forget what our purpose here is. Those who fail to live up to the Southern Edge sect's standards will never be forgiven. Damn, Sahyung's not pulling any punches. Someone thought. It's like we're in a boot camp and this is just a conference. We will keep that in mind, Sahyung. We will never let our guards down. Clap, 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 clap. Then the door opened wide. Clapping his hands, Sama-sung entered the residence. Excellent. Elder. Sama-sung nodded with a smile as everyone got up to greet him. Jin Gemryong's words are exactly right. I feel embarrassed. If I had known that Elder was coming, I would have never said it. No. It was an absolutely wonderful statement. The disciples of the Southern Edge sect need to have such heart. Sama-sung lowered his hand and smiled. In addition to that, yes, Elder. This time, the conference shouldn't just end with victory. We must defeat them so thoroughly that they would never dare to speak the Southern Edge sect's name again. Do you understand what I mean? Jin Gumryong narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? Your sparring will compare both sects' martial arts. It's common sense to be careful not to harm each other. Isn't that right? Sinking into thought, Jin Gumryong smiled. Elder. Yes? Mount Hua's disciples seem to be quite sharp. It appears that they aren't what they used to be. Sama-sung's expression hardened when he heard Jin Jumryong's suddenly weak tone. However, he relaxed as he listened to the following words that flowed from Jin Jumryong. It's a basic principle to avoid harm while sparring with one another. However, they do seem to be more skilled than expected, so there is a limit to how much we can hold back. If we want to avoid getting injured ourselves, we may need to break an arm or leg. Is that all right? Sama Sung put his hand on his chin, trying to maintain his troubled facade. Oh, I see what you're doing here, he thought before speaking. No, that would be unacceptable. No matter how important the spar is, it will mean nothing if our children get hurt. Everyone, you should focus on finishing this conference without getting injured as much as possible. Even, Sama Sung smiled and continued, even if it means injuring your opponent instead. Jin Gumryong smiled and nodded. I will take good care of the Sajays and finish this conference without any accidents. Good. Sama Sung smiled and looked at Jin Jumryong. He wouldn't need to worry about the conference with a child like this anymore. In the future, when Jin Gumryong becomes the sect leader, he is sure to take the Southern Edge sect to unprecedented heights. Of course, he was doing a good enough job now. Gumryong. Yes, Elder. I will not leave too many tasks to you, but I want to ask you one thing. Say it, Elder. Don't leave that cheeky bastard alone. A person's face flitted through Jin Gumryong's mind. Perhaps the others were also thinking the same thing. After all, only one person in Mount Hua was cheeky and arrogant. Are you talking about that child, Chungmyung? Yes. Jin Jumryong smiled brightly. Don't worry, Elder. I will make sure to break him of his attitude. You are short-sighted. Yes? Thinking that he had said something wrong, Jin Jumryong immediately bowed his head. That child has already done a great job by connecting the Unha Guild and Mount Hua. I'm sure everyone is aware of that. Yes. When everyone answered vigorously, Lee Songbek just quietly bowed his head. Lee Songbek couldn't help but feel horrible whenever Yunha was mentioned. After giving him a brief glance, Sama Sung continued. From my point of view, it seems that Mount Hua trusts that child a lot. Yet, he has that kind of personality. Do you understand what I mean? I am a foolish disciple. It is hard for me to understand. The world is a place where people with true abilities will rise and overcome any obstacles. Sometimes, though, it is a place where people without any unique abilities gain momentum and make ridiculous achievements. It may be detrimental for the future of the Southern Edge sect if that child is allowed to grow up like this. Jin Jumryong narrowed his eyes. This? It might be too extreme, but isn't he still just a child now? Yes. With a hoarse voice, Sama Sung continued. Now that child who barely made a name for himself managed to say everything he wanted against me. What will happen when that child fully matures? It will be one or the other, exceptional growth or complete ruination. Isn't he more likely to be ruined? I can't accept that the possibility exists for that child to grow and develop in Mount Hua. That's why we need to nip this problem in the bud. I understand what Elder is saying. Jin Jumryong turned his head. Wu Riang! Yes, Sasuk! San Wu Riang rushed forward from the back. Did you hear what the Elder said? Yes, Sasuk. Don't worry. I will thoroughly destroy his arrogant mouth so that he never mocks anyone again. That won't be enough. Make certain that he can never return to his past self. Entrench the fear of the Southern Edge sect into his bones and make him regret this for the rest of his life. Damn, that's cold. Like, really cold. Wu Riang thought, but kept his composure. Yes, Sasuk! Jin Gumryong nodded. Sun Wuriang was the most capable of the third-class disciples. Although he was not the oldest, he had the greatest skills. His skills began to grow and stand out more prominently after the last conference had already ended. Mount Hua would not even believe this child was the same as back then. He would be the best disciple to handle Chungmyung. Jin Jumryong smiled brightly and turned to Sama Sung. The sun barely rose over the horizon, casting the first light of dawn over Mount Hua. The mountain air was crisp and cool, but the tension among the disciples was palpable. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day of the conference. As the third-class disciples gathered in the courtyard, the unease in their eyes reflected the gravity of what was to come. Yoon Jong Jogul and the others exchanged nervous glances, the weight of expectations pressing down on them. But none of them could escape the looming thought that, despite their best efforts, their skills might not measure up to the Southern Edge sect. Suddenly, the courtyard grew quieter as a figure strode in with his usual air of indifference. Chung Myung, still wiping sleep from his eyes. The guy looked like he didn't have a single care in the world, and that alone was enough to both annoy and comfort the others. Yoon Jong approached him hesitantly. Chung Myung, Did you get any sleep at all? Chung Myung yawned widely before answering. I did. Just a bit. He stretched lazily, his casual demeanor clashing with the tension of the morning. How can you be so relaxed right now? Why shouldn't I be? Chung Myung replied with a shrug. We've done everything we can. The only thing left is to beat those Southern Edge guys into the ground. Yoon Jong sighed. He admired Chung Myung's confidence, but he couldn't share in it entirely. The Southern Edge sect wasn't to be taken lightly, and everyone knew it. Suddenly, Joe Gol broke the silence. Hey, speaking of those Southern Edge jerks, are we really ready for them? They're not the same as they were before either. Chung Myung smirked. Ready or not, it doesn't matter. They're just another mountain to climb. We've trained for this. You guys just have to go out there and show them that Mount Hua doesn't roll over for anyone. Joe Gul frowned. You make it sound so easy. It is easy, Chung Myung replied, his eyes narrowing. As long as you remember one thing, win. It's that simple. There's no might or maybe here, just win. The disciples fell silent at Chung Myung's words, and as simple as they were, they carried a weight that pressed down on them. It wasn't about being flashy or proving something, they just had to win. Yoon Jong nodded. We'll do our best. Chung Myung glanced at him sideways, smirking. Your best better be good enough. Meanwhile, across the courtyard in the Blue Plum dorms, Jin Gum Ryong stood before his gathered disciples. The mood among the Southern Edge sect was entirely different. There was no nervousness here, only cold, calculated confidence. Jin Gum Ryong's piercing gaze swept over his comrades, and with a voice filled with ice, he addressed them. Today is the day we remind the world of Southern Edge's true power. Today is the day Mount Hua's delusions crumble into dust. The Southern Edge disciples clenched their fists in unison, their eyes burning with resolve. Jin Gum Ryong continued. I don't care how skilled Mount Hua's disciples have become. I don't care if they've somehow gained a bit of fame or improved since our last encounter. Today, we will shatter any hope they have left. His words echoed in the hearts of every disciple present. They weren't here just to win. They were here to dominate. We won't just defeat them, Jin Gum Ryong said, his voice cold and calculated. We will break them. As he finished speaking, Sama Sung entered the room, his eyes gleaming with pride at Jin Gum Ryong's speech. Your words speak for all of us, Gum Ryong, Sama Sung said. Remember, this isn't just a competition, it's a statement. We're not here to leave survivors. We're here to leave a legacy. Jin Gum Ryong nodded, his eyes narrowing. And that legacy begins today. The stage was set. Mount Hua and Southern Edge were moments away from their fateful confrontation. The air was thick with anticipation as disciples from both sects gathered in the arena, spectators lining the surrounding platforms to witness the upcoming battle. As Chung Myung stood at the edge of the arena, he stared at the Southern Edge disciples with a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Yoon Jong, standing beside him, glanced at his friend. What's so funny? Chung Myung chuckled. Oh, nothing. Just thinking about how fun it's going to be to wipe those smug looks off their faces. Jo Gul looked over. You really think we can beat them, don't you? Chung Myung's grin widened. I don't think it. I know it. From across the arena, Jin Gum Ryong locked eyes with Chung Myung, a dark promise of violence passing between them. This was it, the moment of truth. Let the battle begin. Episode 94. If you lose to those bastards, you lose everything. Chung Myung looked around as he climbed up the mountain. She isn't here, right? Chung Myung, who was quite nervous that Yu Yisol would catch up with him, sighed deeply. Sigh, what am I doing? Chung Myung had nothing in this world he feared. In the past, when he was the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, there were people afraid of him, but he was never afraid of others. Wasn't the sect leader of the Shaolin sect even reluctant to meet him? But now, that same Chung Myung was in a situation where he avoided a little girl. What am I being made to deal with? It would be so much simpler if he could just hit her on the head, wrap her up with a rope, and toss her off a cliff somewhere. But since she's just an innocent nuisance, he can't beat her up, right? Huh? What about Baek Cheon? That bastard came at me first. There's a difference between a senior who picks a fight and a senior that's a nuisance. Well, for the first time in this life, no, for the first time ever, Chung Myung was avoiding others. What's become of me? Why do I need to avoid people this early in the morning? Chung Myung, who stopped to take a deep breath, was ready to run up again. Oh? He felt something. Yeah! Yeah! I knew this was going to happen. It's useless to try fooling an old ghost like me. You can't deceive. Huh? Chung Myung tilted his head. This chi he was feeling was different from Yuiseol's. Yuiseol boasts a weird sense of non-existence. It was something that Chung Myung would have to heavily concentrate on feeling. So Chung Myung would listen for her footsteps instead. However, what he was feeling now was too strong and clear to be Yuiseol. And 2 people? Not just one. Chung Myung's eyes narrowed, and he moved cautiously as he sensed the chi. For 2 people to be meeting in this deep mountain so early in the morning. It felt like a conspiracy. I need to see what they're up to. Chung Myung's eyes began to sparkle. Swoosh! His feet began to swiftly cut through the wind and accelerate. Chung Myung quickly halted and melded into his surroundings as he approached the area where he felt the chi coming from. And then, he carefully snuck forward and stuck his head out to have a peek. Huh? Chung Myung blinked his eyes. No matter how much he tried to double-check if his senses were right, the sight in front of him didn't change. One of the 2 figures was someone Chung Myung knew. Baekcheon. It wasn't strange for Baekcheon to be here. After all, this was still Mount Hua's territory. But the other person standing there was unexpected. He wasn't from Mount Hua, and the situation seemed strange. Why is he here? Jin Gyeomryong. Jin Gyeomryong, one of the Southern Edge sect's greatest disciples, stood opposite Baekcheon with an odd expression. Why are the 2 of them meeting here? It was definitely a conspiracy. Chung Myung cautiously moved closer to listen in. You seem to be doing well. Jin Gyeomryong smiled brightly and spoke to Baekcheon, but Baekcheon's face clearly expressed his displeasure. You seem to be at ease. Isn't there a reason for that, Dongryong? Jin Gyeomryong and Baekcheon both turned their gazes toward the sudden sound. Ah, shit! Chung Myung desperately held his breath and concealed himself. It was almost unbearable for Chung Myung to restrain his laughter when he heard the word Dongryong. Bronze Dragon. The 2 looked at each other again. They probably thought it was just a passing beast. Baekcheon's face contorted. Don't call me by that name. I am Baekcheon. Don't think of throwing away the name your parents gave you. No matter what anyone says, you are Jin Dongryong. Ugh, please, just stop already. Chung Myung clutched the floor and tried not to laugh. Oh shit, I might die. Dongryong. Baekcheon's real name is Dongryong. Ah, my stomach might rip at this rate. Chung Myung's body trembled and was cramped as he fought to hold back his laughter. Baekcheon's face quickly turned red as if it would burst. It's Baekcheon. Fine, Dongryong. Wow, he is really losing it. Baekcheon hated it so much that his face was burning red, but the other guy just kept calling him Dongryong. Such a bad personality. Whether or not he knew about Chung Myung's internal evaluation of him, Jin Ryong continued to speak with a smile. Isn't Mount Hua a great place to live? You look pretty good too, don't you think? What are you trying to say? I just wanted to see you. A smile grew on Jin Gemryong's lips. To see what kind of an ugly life that little brother of mine who ran away from home to beat his older brother was living in Mount Hua. You saw that 2 years ago, didn't you? I never get tired of kicking a defeated dog. Not even 100 times would be enough. Baekcheon's face crumpled. This was Jin Gemryong's true character. He was merciless to those he considered weaker than himself. He usually disguises himself with a kind face, but he was rotten inside. How long had Baekcheon been bullied by him? What do you say? If you get on your knees and beg, I can accept you into the Southern Edge sect. Don't spout shit. Baekcheon looked straight at Jin Gyeomryong. I am Baekcheon, the great Sahyung of Mount Hua's second-class disciples. My dream is to make Mount Hua into a well-known sect that stands above the Southern Edge sect. So don't say such words in front of me again. Oh? Chung Myung looked at the 2 in front of him with shining eyes. Let's see. So, these 2 are brothers, one Gyeomryong, Golden Dragon, and the other is Dongryong. I really want to meet their father, at least once. He needed to meet the enemy that caused his belly such pain. What on earth did he think when he named his children like that? That's why Baekcheon ran away. Baekcheon stood there, staring at Chung Myung's retreating figure, feeling something stirring inside him. It wasn't just the words Chung Myung spoke, but the confidence that he carried. that unshakable, almost arrogant belief that Mount Hua would rise. A faint smile tugged at Baekchun's lips. Right? Let's run wild. With newfound determination, Baekchun followed after Chungmyung, the tension from his encounter with Jin Jumryong slowly fading. He wasn't going to let his older brother's venomous words shake him anymore. This was his path, and he would prove that Mount Hua was no longer a sect to look down on. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, the training grounds were already bustling with activity. Disciples from both Mount Hua and the Southern Edge sect were preparing for the next phase of the conference. The air was thick with anticipation, each side eager to prove their worth. Chung Myung walked through the crowd with a relaxed, almost lazy stride, his hands casually folded behind his head. The Mount Hua disciples who spotted him quickly moved aside, some giving him nervous glances, others full of awe. Everyone knew that despite his laid-back attitude, Chung Myung was the true powerhouse of the sect. Baekchun caught up with him, now walking side by side. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Baekchun asked, his tone more serious. Chung Myung turned his head slightly, smirking. "Ready? What's there to be ready for? They're the ones who should be worried. I'm just here for the exercise." Baekchun snorted. "Exercise? You make it sound like we're just taking a stroll in the mountains." "Well, isn't that what it is? A few jumps, some sword swings, a couple of broken bones. You know, the usual." Baekchun shook his head, but there was no hiding the grin spreading across his face. Somehow, Chung Myung's arrogance was oddly reassuring. Suddenly, a loud voice boomed across the grounds, breaking the tension. "Mount Hua! Southern Edge! Step forward and prepare for the next round of matches." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The disciples of both sects gathered in neat formations, standing tall and ready. On one side, the Southern Edge sect stood in pristine uniforms, their discipline and formality clear. On the other side, Mount Hua's disciples stood with a more relaxed posture, but there was a fierceness in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Chung Myung stretched lazily, letting out a loud yawn. "All right, let's get this over with." Baekchun glanced at him. "You're not even a little bit nervous?" "Nervous?" Chung Myung raised an eyebrow. "For what? It's just another day of beating up some idiots who think they're hot shit?" Baekchun couldn't help but chuckle. "You have a unique way of looking at things, Chung Myung." "Well, someone's got to keep things interesting." As the matches were about to begin, Jin Gumryong stepped forward from the Southern Edge sect's ranks, his presence immediately drawing attention. His sharp gaze scanned the Mount Hua disciples, lingering briefly on Baekchun before shifting to Chung Myung. A smirk formed on Jin Gumryong's lips. "Let's see if Mount Hua can offer anything better than last time." Baekchun felt his blood boil. But before he could respond, Chung Myung stepped forward, meeting Jin Gumryong's gaze with a casual smile. "Don't worry, Dongryong," Chung Myung said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've got something special for you this time." Baekchun's face turned red again at the mention of his childhood name, but Jin Gumryong's expression darkened. "What did you just call me?" Chung Myung waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, nothing. Just reminiscing about some old times. You know, before you got all full of yourself." Jin Gumryong's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret those words." Chung Myung shrugged. "Maybe. But you'll regret stepping foot on Mount Hua's land. Let's see who gets to laugh last." The tension between the two was palpable, but Chung Myung's carefree attitude seemed to unsettle Jin Gumryong more than anger him. The referee stepped forward, breaking the stare-off between them. "The first match will begin shortly. Mount Hua, Southern Edge, send forth your first fighters." Baekchun took a deep breath. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. Chung Myung glanced at Baekchun and slapped him on the back, hard enough to make him stumble forward. "Go on, Sasuk. Let's show these clowns what Mount Hua is all about." Baekchun steadied himself and nodded. He stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his resolve strong. This was for Mount Hua, for everything they had worked for everything he believed in. Jin Jumryong smirked, stepping back to let one of his junior brothers take the stage. As Baekchun walked towards the center of the ring, he could feel the eyes of his fellow disciples on him, their silent support pushing him forward. He had no intention of letting them down. The first match began with a loud gong, and Baekchun took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto his opponent. The fight was on, and there was no turning back. From the sidelines, Chung Myung watched with a knowing smile. Let's run wild, indeed. Episode 95. If you lose to those bastards, you lose everything. Hi. The day of the Mount Hua Southern Edge Sect Conference had finally dawned. Hyunjong was quietly looking at the second and third class disciples lined up in front of him. Seeing the hardened and stiff expressions on the faces of these children, Hyunjong felt his heart clench. Even the children lined up in front of him understood the weight of their burden at this conference. He felt as if his heart would break. He wasn't sure when things had changed, but this burden should originally have been shouldered by the elders and the sect leader. However, at some point after the initiation of this conference, the responsibility of proving the sect's worth and defending its honor passed on to the sect's young disciples. Hyunjong believed that even the second-class disciples were too young to carry this duty, not to mention the third-class disciples. Still, he felt infinitely grateful to the children who withheld all complaints and stepped forward despite their worries. Sect leader. Hyunjong recognized the anxious atmosphere, and Hanjong slightly raised his head. The sect leader had fallen into sentimental thoughts and left the children standing in silence for too long. Hyunjong coughed to ease himself out of his emotional thoughts and spoke with a soft voice. Everyone seems nervous. Hyunjong looked at the children and shook his head. You don't have to be so stiff. It doesn't matter whether we win or lose. All you must do is use this as an opportunity to learn and grow. Hyunjong made eye contact with everyone as he spoke with determination. No matter what the outcome may be, you are all the proud disciples of Mount Hua. All you need to do is remember that fact. It was crudely spoken. It was a speech that didn't rouse their morale or seek to inspire the students to defeat their opponents and bring glory to Mount Hua. But those words eased the disciples' tense minds, and their expressions began to soften. Hyunjong nodded when he saw that everyone had begun to relax. I will keep watching over you. So go. With that, Hyunjong turned and walked away. Hyunyoung quickly followed after him. You won't go with them? No matter how difficult this conference may be, there is no need for those who will watch and those who will fight to arrive together. The children must also have things to say between themselves. Let them have their time together. Yes, sect leader. Hyunyoung signaled to the other elders and undisciples before they quickly followed Hyunjong. As the second class and third class disciples sighed, one person stepped forward. Baekcheon. He stood in front of everyone with a determined face. Today, we will fight the Southern Edge Sect. Baekcheon's gaze landed on Chung Myung briefly before returning. As the sect leader said, there is no shame in losing. What is shameful is failing to do your best. When we fight as proud disciples of Mount Hua. Yes, Sahyung, let's go! With a resolute expression, Baekcheon led the second-class disciples. A fierce aura of determination emanated from the second-class disciples who followed behind him. Even Yu Yisol, who was farthest back, showed a much more serious visage than usual. Ahem. Yoonjong snuck out to the front as the second-class disciples headed off, and the third-class disciples warmly welcomed him. What, does the great Sahyung have something to say? No, let's just do this. Such days scare me. Ha! Seriously, I heard fighting turns people crazy. These bastards. Look at you bastards, thinking that I can act like Baekcheon Sasuk. I get it. Let's move already. My legs hurt. If you're going to be like this, let's all say something. Jo Gul Sahyung, go ahead and stand ahead of us. It will save some time. Yoonjong took a deep breath. They were all such good kids in the past. How did things end up like this? Yoonjong turned his head and looked at the culprit. Even though a massive event like the conference was happening, Chung Myung looked like he was dying from boredom. Chung Myung, huh? Do you have anything to say? Chung Myung laughed. Is there anything worth saying? Chung Myung turned his head and spoke calmly. Let's finish this quickly and go eat. Move it. Yoonjong unwittingly smiled at Chung Myung's casual remark. Come, you brat. He didn't know about the others, but he was sure of one thing. Normally, Chung Myung was a madman. But in times like this, Yoonjong felt reassured by his presence. Let's go. Yoonjong took the lead and guided everyone to the conference. Following him, Chung Myung's eyes seemed to glimmer. The Mount Hua Southern Edge Conference is an event created for both sects to exchange techniques and experience the other. Of course, there is a deeper intent internally since it was a way for the Southern Edge sect to intervene with Mount Hua's growth and humiliate them. On the surface, however, both sects maintain the appearance that this event was held out of mutual respect. Therefore, this event never entertained visitors. Until now, only the members of both sects had gathered together to witness the exchanges. And this event was no different. At least, that's what everyone thought before they arrived at the hall. Whisper. Hanzhong stared with his eyes wide open. After passing through Mount Hua's gate, one would find the Great Training Hall. Due to the nature of the event, they required a large space. Therefore, the conference was held here without exception. Until now, all of Mount Hua's and the Southern Edge sect's disciples would line up on the left and right sides of this wide area. Today, however, a rather strange scene was playing out. What are they? An unknown crowd had gathered in the training hall, with more people continuing to pour in. What was more bizarre was that they each held some kind of item in their hands. Every one of them was carrying either chairs or tables. Hyunjong was taken aback by the unexpected situation. Unam quickly approached him with an urgent face. Sect leader, what happened here? A massive swarm of people flocked to the front gate and demanded to see the conference for themselves. There were too many people gathered for us to refuse. Hyunjong shook his head. Did the Southern Edge sect call them here? If so, the purpose was obvious. Their goal must be to show how horribly they crush Mount Hua. He didn't notice at first, but upon closer inspection, there were many colorfully dressed middle-aged men. Among them were some familiar faces to Hyunjong. He could tell that many of the people here were Shanxi's officials. Even local celebrities were called, and all around them were people in official uniforms. Considering their influence, once they witnessed the events here, they would spread the news all over Shanxi. This is bad. Hyunjong, who felt a bit anxious at that concerning thought, spoke in a lower voice. Don't you know that strangers aren't allowed inside without permission? But sect leader, aren't their intentions clear? It is true, but, huh? A low voice was heard in Hyunjong's ears. Sect leader, I don't believe this is something we coordinated before, is it? Hyunjong turned his head. The Southern Edge sect elder, Sama Sung, approached them with a slightly embarrassed face. Hyunjong paid particular attention to his embarrassed expression. Did the Southern Edge sect really not do this? If Sama Sung had gathered everyone here, there was no reason for him to be so bewildered. He would have leisurely walked in with a grin. Hyunjong snuck a glance at Unam. What happened? I tried to stop them, but the person who brought them is me, sect leader. Both Hyunjong and Sama Sung shifted their sights to the new arrival and witnessed a familiar smiling face approach them. Elder Huang? Elder Huang? Huang Munyak of the Unha Merchant Guild. It's quite exhilarating. Elder Huang arrived, and the two representatives greeted him. Still, they each had their own doubts. With a bright smile, Huang Munyak said, Since the conference is being held, I thought there should be some excitement, so I invited an audience. Hyunjong frowned and was about to refute when Sama Sung's response beat him to the punch. I don't think it's a bad idea. Since this will be the last conference, it should be all right to make it a grand event. Sama Sung held the power of the Southern Edge sect. Hyunjong sighed. As Unam's voice echoed through the hall, the atmosphere shifted from anxious anticipation to electric excitement. The crowd settled into their seats, the murmur of whispers gradually fading into silence, leaving only the sounds of shifting feet and quiet breaths. Unam glanced at the gathered audience, a mix of disciples from both sects and the esteemed guests from the surrounding region, who had come to witness this unprecedented event. With a firm nod, he continued, Today's conference will serve as an opportunity for both sects to display their techniques, exchange knowledge, and most importantly, to prove their worth. As he spoke, the Southern Edge sect disciples stood proudly on one side, their eyes glinting with competitive spirit. In contrast, the Mount Hua disciples were more reserved, their expressions ranging from determination to anxiety. Chung Myung, standing near the front, couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. He leaned closer to Baek Chon, who had taken his place at the forefront of the Mount Hua disciples. You ready to show these guys what we're made of? he whispered, a cheeky grin spreading across his face. Baekchun shot him a look of mixed exasperation and amusement. Let's focus on the fight first. You maniac, he whispered back. We can't let them see us sweat. Chung Myung laughed, leaning back slightly. Sweating is for the weak. We're going to give them a show they won't forget. Yoonjong cleared his throat, trying to maintain some semblance of order. All right, everyone, let's show them our best. Remember what the sect leader said. We fight with honor and pride as disciples of Mount Hua. As Yoonjong rallied the troops, the audience's murmurs grew louder, discussing the legendary techniques of both sects and the expected outcomes of the matches. The anticipation in the air was palpable. First, we will have the second-class disciples compete. Am announced, his voice cutting through the tension. Let's invite the representatives from the Southern Edge sect to take the stage. With that, the Southern Edge sect's second-class disciples stepped forward, led by their top fighter, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Jongwon. He exuded confidence, a smirk playing on his lips as he surveyed the Mount Hua disciples. As the Southern Edge disciples took their positions, Baekchun's focus sharpened. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, knowing that he had to lead his team to victory against this brash group. Stay sharp. Let's do this together. The first match was announced, and the atmosphere intensified. The audience leaned forward, eager for the clash. As Baekchun and Jongwon faced off, their eyes locked in a battle of wills. Are you ready to lose? Jongwon taunted, cracking his knuckles. Not a chance. Baekchun shot back, determination etched on his face. The signal was given, and the two disciples charged at each other. The crowd erupted in cheers as their fists collided, energy crackling in the air. Each movement was fluid, a dance of martial prowess that showcased their training and discipline. Chung Myung watched intently, a grin plastered on his face. Come on, Baekchun. Show them what you've got. As the fight progressed, it became clear that Baekchun's skill was formidable, countering Jongwon's aggressive style with precise movements and strategic defenses. The Southern Edge disciples grew restless, their confidence beginning to waver as the Mount Hua disciple gained the upper hand. With a swift maneuver, Baekchun executed a series of powerful strikes, forcing Jongwon to retreat momentarily. The crowd gasped, eyes wide with surprise. Yeah, that's it! Chung Myung cheered, pumping his fist in the air. But just as it seemed Baekchun would secure victory, Jongwon unleashed a hidden technique, a powerful kick aimed at Baekchun's midsection. Time seemed to slow as the blow connected, sending Baekchun staggering back. No, Yoonjong shouted, the tension in his voice reflecting the collective anxiety of the Mount Hua disciples. But Baekchun, regaining his balance, quickly countered with an unexpected twist, redirecting Jongwon's momentum against him. With a decisive strike, he sent his opponent crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted into cheers for Baekchun, their support palpable. Mount Hua! Mount Hua! Echoed through the hall. Am beamed with pride as he observed his disciple's performance. Well done, Baekchun. You've proven our strength today. Baekchun stood panting, catching his breath, but a triumphant smile spread across his face. He raised his fists in victory, the weight of responsibility lifting slightly from his shoulders. Next up, the third-class disciples. Unam called, ushering in the next round of competitors. Chung Myung's eyes sparkled with excitement as he nudged Jo Gul. It's our turn next. Time to show them who's boss. Jo Gul rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. You're going to do something reckless, aren't you? Me? Never, Chung Myung said with a wink, ready to embrace whatever chaos awaited them. As the matches continued, the tension between the two sects escalated, with each bout igniting fervor among the spectators. The Southern Edge sect disciples became increasingly determined to reclaim their honor, while the Mount Hua disciples fought valiantly to prove their worth. With the stage set and the atmosphere charged, it was clear that this conference would be remembered for years to come, a testament to the spirit of competition, camaraderie, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. Episode 96, I'm Not Joking Around 1. I'm excited. Haha, thanks to Elder Huang, I'll get to see such an interesting event. Wang Munyak smiled at the praise pouring in from the people around him. I have to thank you for accepting the invitation. I hope you didn't have a hard time coming all the way out here. Ha ha, I couldn't afford to miss this rare opportunity. Blessings and cheers came and went. However, Wang Munyak didn't miss that many people were carefully examining the situation, trying to figure out who'd rise to the occasion at this conference. Everyone here wasn't just here for a show. They wanted to know who'd take the W in this battle. And to the surprise of no one, their eyes were glued to the Southern Edge sect. Sects and merchants have always had this weird relationship, like an on-again, off-again couple. You've got to stay sharp because the next thing you know, one of them's ghosting you and the other's got all the power. Money flows toward power, after all. They were all trying to measure the future strength of the Southern Edge sect by judging their next generation. You know, investing in the next big thing, like betting on which crypto will blow up next. A fight between Mount Hua and the Southern Edge sect. Isn't the opponent a bit disappointing, though? You're right. If they wanted to show off, they should have called for a stronger sect. Can they really flex their muscles against Mount Hua? The crowd whispered, clearly unimpressed. They aren't wrong, Wang Munyak thought. Mount Hua was once the big daddy of the 9 great sects, but now they're barely hanging on like an ex who used to be hot but let themselves go. The Southern Edge sect, though? They've been hitting the gym and moved up to the 10 great sects. But still, Wang Munyak's eyes fell on the Mount Hua disciples. Where was that little maniac, Chung Myung? I don't think that kid knows how to lose. So, was he planning something clever? Wang Munyak chuckled. It's annoying that Mount Hua's fallen so far, but if we're going to save face, they've got to start rebuilding their rep. That's why I decided to roll with that brat. His heart raced, wondering what might unfold next. Standing center stage, Unam looked at both sides of the hall where the disciples of Mount Hua and the Southern Edge sect faced off. Despite the sudden crowd, it was easy enough to lead since this conference had become tradition. First, the representatives of each faction's disciples will engage one-on-one. 10 representatives of the second-class disciples will perform. Unam's voice echoed with authority. Initiate! And just like that, one disciple from each side stepped up. Jin Ryong and Baek Chon, both leaders of their sect's second-class disciples. Sahyung! Sahyung! Do your best! Don't let them clown you! Baek Chon took a deep breath. His face was tight with nerves. He shot one last look at his juniors before stepping into the arena. Across from him, Jin Ryong swaggered over like a man who knew he had already won. They squared up. As expected, said a man from the Daebung Merchant Guild, Wei Zikai, who watched from the audience. Jin Ryong is the golden boy. He's gonna lead the Southern Edge sect one day. Just look at him. He's got that hero vibe. Yeah, he looks like the real deal. Jin Ryong, in his white robe, wielding a wooden sword, immediately caught the crowd's attention. But the guy across from him isn't bad either. Well, sure, they're like night and day, one in white, the other in black. Perfect rivals. Baek Chon stood tall, dressed in black, staring down his opponent. There's a buzz in the air, but does Mount Hua's guy really stand a chance against Jin Ryong? Who knows? Mount Hua's been down bad for a while now, but lately, something's changed. If you think about their legacy, they might pull a fast one. Despite that, no one truly believed Baek Chon could beat Jin Ryong. Mount Hua wasn't the beast it used to be. If people believed they had any fight left, they wouldn't have cut ties so fast. What the audience really wanted was to see how much the Southern Edge sect had bulked up. Samasung's face tightened as he overheard the whispers. He knew they were just throwing Mount Hua a pity bone, but it still made him feel gross. Show them what's up, Gumryong. Because in reality, Mount Hua had no business even being in the same sentence as the Southern Edge sect. Hyunjong bit his lip, staring at Baek Chon. Give it your all. He wanted his disciple to walk away with no regrets. The tension rose as Jin Gumryong and Baek Chon faced off. Jin Gumryong spoke first. You actually showed up. Baek Chon's face hardened in determination. I'm the great Sahyung of Mount Hua's second-class disciples. Running away isn't in my job description. Big words for a little man. Jin Ryong raised his sword, pointing at Baek Chon. Well, the smallest dogs always bark the loudest. You planning on getting bit by a dog, then? I misspoke. You're not even a dog. You? Come on. Like I told you yesterday, I'm going to show you just how pathetic you are. Baek Chon didn't respond. He briefly glanced at Hyunjong. Sect leader is watching. Now wasn't the time to let personal grudges cloud his mind. I am Baekchon, the second-class disciple. He locked eyes with Jin Gumryong, raised his wooden sword, and squared off. The audience held their breath as the atmosphere charged up like a power grid about to blow. Both men were their sect's pride and joy. Normally, they'd face off at the end of the conference to wrap things up, but this time, they were the opening act. Everyone knew this fight might set the tone for the whole damn conference. Baekchon moved first. Pah! The floor shook as he launched forward, aiming a clean, no-nonsense strike at Jin Gumryong's neck. Swoosh! Jin Gumryong sidestepped, smooth as butter, avoiding the strike. But Baekchon's sword chased after him, unleashing a flurry of illusory strikes, as if dozens of blades were slicing through the air. Mount Hua's sword arts painted the hall. Oh! Amazing! Mount Hua's kids are better than I thought. The technique was beautiful and sharp, making the audience sit up. Even though it was a wooden sword, the strike had the edge of a real one. Jin Gumryong stood his ground like a boss. The Mount Hua disciples clenched their fists, feeling the energy. Jogul practically bounced in his seat. As expected of Baekchon, Sasek's Chongyang Fierce Tiger Sword is the real deal. Mount Hua's disciples couldn't contain their excitement. They knew how much blood, sweat, and probably tears Baekchon poured into his training after the humiliation of the last conference. He had locked himself away to train in secret. The guy who could have had it easy on Mount Hua had chosen to live the hard way, focusing solely on his sword. Baekchon's blade danced, pursuing Jin Gumryong relentlessly. His sword's every swing was precise and deadly. Each movement was sharp enough to wound. Hyunjong clenched his fists as he watched. When did that child reach such a level? His skill was almost at the same level as the undisciples. He always knew Baekchon was talented, but this was something else entirely. Hope flickered in the hearts of Mount Hua's martial artists as they watched. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Even Yunjong couldn't hide his excitement. Chungmyeong, Sasuke is pushing him back! Yes! Maybe we can win. No chance. What? Yunjong turned to Chungmyeong, who lounged back in his chair, looking unimpressed. If you want to win, you gotta hit the other guy. He hasn't landed a single blow. But does Sayoung look like he's got this in the bag? Yunjong turned back to Baekchon, who now looked like he was struggling. Why? Baekchon was swinging with everything he had. His footwork, angles, and strikes were on point, and he channeled his chi with precision, swinging with every fiber of his being. Light as a feather, sharp as a knife. But no matter how fast or hard he swung, his sword couldn't touch Jin Gumryong. Why can't I hit him? It felt like Jin Gumryong was standing on the other side of a canyon, so close, yet completely out of reach. Drenched in sweat and frustration, Baekchon screamed as he made his final attack, unleashing an illusion of several swords aimed at Jin Gam. I'm not joking around, too. Jin Gumryong's wooden sword descended with precision, striking Baekchon repeatedly. Each blow reverberated through the training hall as Baekchon staggered under the barrage, but his body refused to fall completely. The atmosphere in the crowd shifted from excitement to disbelief at the relentless display of dominance. Baekchon clenched his jaw, refusing to cry out in pain. No matter how much it hurt, he wouldn't give Jin Gumryong the satisfaction. His pride, the eyes of his fellow disciples, and the legacy of Mount Hua were all riding on his ability to endure. Is this all Mount Hua can muster? Jin Gumryong taunted, his voice oozing with arrogance. If this is the best you've got, your sect is in worse shape than I thought. Baekchon, breathing heavily, struggled to lift his sword once more. His body was screaming for rest, but his resolve was unwavering. I will not yield. How admirable, Jin Gumryong sneered. But it's pointless. You can't even touch me. With a quick flick of his wrist, Jin Gumryong knocked Baekchon's sword from his hand. Baekchon barely had time to process the loss of his weapon before the next strike landed squarely on his chest, sending him sprawling to the floor. His breaths came in ragged gasps as he fought to stay conscious. You're done. Baekchon tried to stand, but his arms felt like lead, and his vision blurred from the effort. As he struggled, Jin Gumryong loomed over him, grinning, clearly relishing the moment. Just as all hope seemed lost and Mount Hua's defeat felt inevitable. Thud! The sound of a casual step echoed through the hall. A figure sauntered forward, hands resting behind his head, whistling a carefree tune as if he were taking a stroll on a sunny afternoon. Oi, 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 that's enough! I think you've had your fun. Every eye in the hall turned toward the source of the voice. It was none other than Chung Myung. The disciples of the Southern Edge sect glared at him, while Mount Hua's disciples stared in shock, unsure of what he was planning. Even the elders looked taken aback by his sudden appearance. Chung Myung, this is not your turn, Onam began, his voice laced with concern. But Chung Myung paid him no mind, walking past as if the elder wasn't even there. Jin Gumryong's expression darkened with annoyance. A third-class disciple thinks he can interrupt a fight between second-class disciples? Know your place, Junior. Chung Myung paused for a moment, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. My place, huh? Well, funny thing about that. I was gonna sit this one out, let you have your moment, but watching this mess is like watching a squirrel try to wrestle a bear. Entertaining, but painful. The crowd buzzed with murmurs. Who was this young disciple to speak so boldly to Jin Gumryong? Jin Gumryong's face twisted with irritation. You dare? Yeah, I dare. I just don't get what's taking you so long, Chung Myung interrupted with a shrug. He bent down, picked up Baekchon's fallen sword, and casually tossed it back to him. Get up, Sahyung. Baekchon, barely holding onto consciousness, groaned. Chung Myung, no excuses. You're still breathing. Stand up. Chung Myung's voice was sharp, cutting through Baekchon's dazed state like a blade. Baekchon clenched his fists, summoning the last of his strength to rise. His body screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain and stood. His uniform was tattered, and his breathing was labored, but he was back on his feet. Jin Gumryong scoffed, clearly unimpressed. Pathetic. This is the so-called pride of Mount Hua? What a farce. Chung Myung let out a long yawn, stretching his arms as if he were bored. You're strong, sure, but honestly, watching this feels like listening to a bad joke. Too much buildup, not enough punchline. The audience fell silent, stunned by Chung Myung's audacity. Bore you? Jin Gumryong repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Yeah, Chung Myung said casually. You've got the moves, the attitude, but all I'm seeing is a lot of noise, not much substance. The Southern Edge sect disciples bristled with anger. How dare he speak like that? Before anyone could stop him, Chung Myung stepped forward, calmly placing himself between Jin Gumryong and Baekchon. Here's the deal, he said, his tone nonchalant. You and me, right now. Let's settle this. Jin Gumryong's eyes burned with fury. You think you, a mere third-class disciple, can challenge me? Chung Myung tilted his head thoughtfully. Third class, second class. Swords don't care about titles. If you're too scared, I get it. Not everyone's cut out for a real challenge. Jin Gumryong's face flushed with anger. Fine, you want to be humiliated that badly? I'll oblige. He raised his sword, his eyes locked onto Chung Myung, prepared to finish what he had started. Meanwhile, Chung Myung stood casually, arms still resting behind his head as if he hadn't a care in the world. All right then, Chung Myung muttered, rolling his neck and cracking his knuckles. Time to show the genius what real swordsmanship looks like. The air grew thick with tension, the audience holding its collective breath. This battle was going to change everything. Episode 97, I'm Not Joking Around 2. The difference was known from the start. Jin Gumryong has been recognized for his talent since childhood. Among the people Baekchon knew, the one most suited to being called a genius was Jin Gumryong. Seriously, this guy was like the poster child for I Woke Up Like This. He had already experienced defeat. In the last conference, and even before that, Baekchon had never won against Jin Gumryong. He was only ever left with the bitter taste of defeat, kind of like that last sip of a bad date. But I thought I could narrow the gap this time, because he worked so hard. Chung Myung criticized his efforts as misguided, but Baekchon endured a bone-cutting ordeal for that training. At least, he was confident that he trained twice as much as Jin Gumryong. I mean, he could probably bench press a small horse at this point. He believed that even if he couldn't win, he would have at least slightly bridged the divide between them. But the reality was worse than he'd imagined. Puck! Kuak! Jin Gumryong's sword struck Baekchon's ankle. As he staggered back, he desperately clenched his teeth to sober himself enough to regain balance. At this rate, he'd need a wheelchair and a lifetime supply of ice packs. Baekchan's ankle would have been severed if this was a real sword. Thankfully, it wasn't a real sword, but a wooden one. But hey, nothing says I'm okay like being a human panada, right? But conversely, since this wasn't a real sword, he couldn't even accept defeat so easily. Why can't I reach you? Why? I tried so hard. Pwak! Jin Gemryong's sword flew again and hit Baekchan's other thigh. The impact almost broke the bone. For a moment, Baekchan's distraught mind was lost to pain, but he neither groaned nor screamed. He slapped the floor with his wooden sword and tried to attack again. Someone call an exorcist. This man is possessed by the spirit of stubbornness. Pah! His sword aimed for Jin Gumryong's head. A simple blow, but it was fast and sharp. Kind of like his grandma's roast beef on a bad day. Slow. However, Jin Gumryong took a step back and twisted his body to negate the attack. This guy was practically dancing around the arena like it was a Saturday night fever. Puck! And Jin Gumryong's sword struck Baekchan's left shoulder. His flesh burst from the impact, and blood began to drip from the wound. Kwak! It would only take one more attack for Jin Gumryong to perfectly finish this match. However, he didn't end it and stepped back instead. He looked down at Baekchan with an arrogant expression. Kwak! Baekchan, with one hand, pressed heavily on the ground and tried to raise himself up again. Talk about tenacity. This guy was like a bad penny. He just kept turning up. Bloodshot eyes. Despite the pain, he glared at Jin Gumryong with fierce will. Oh? Jin Gumryong looked at Baekchan, a bit surprised. You're struggling so hard just to stand, but your spirit is still alive. Jin Gumryong raised his sword at Baekchan. But that spirit is all you have. You will remain unable to even touch the hem of my clothes for the rest of your life. And trust me, my clothes aren't that nice. I shop at discount stores. Why? You must really lack a brain. I already told you. Taking a look around, Jin Gumryong spoke. That's how great the difference between Mount Hua and the Southern Edge Sect is. The martial arts of Mount Hua cannot compare to the martial arts of the Southern Edge Sect. 100 years may pass. Even if you had 1,000 years, nothing would change. His arrogance was shining brighter than a new car in the summer sun. An arrogant declaration. But no one could refute Jin Gumryong. Even the elders of Mount Hua could only listen and bite their lips, but they could not bring themselves to decry his remark. They were probably thinking of taking a collective therapy session after this. Hanzhong shut his eyes tightly. How long must we endure this? How far does he intend to go? Who could understand this situation? The elders of the sect were unable to condemn or punish a second-class disciple despite him uttering such humiliating words. My disciples, forgive me. But Jin Gumryong's arrogance didn't end there. He smiled at Baekchan. If you still want to catch up to me even after this, then you'd better leave Mount Hua. There's no future here. The only thing left for this ruined sect is ridicule. Wow, this guy really thought he was the main character in a drama, didn't he? Baekchan clenched his teeth. I am a disciple of Mount Hua. Well, that's fine. Then if that's the case, Jin Gumryong took his sword in hand and rushed at Baekchan. Baekchan tried to somehow defend himself, but his arm failed to respond. His arm probably saw Jin Gumryong coming and decided to take a permanent vacation. Pwak! A vicious sound rang out as Baekchan was struck another dozen times before he collapsed. Thud! Gumryong glanced at Baekchan, who fell unconscious, and grinned. I need to show you. Ah, my bad. It's a little too late now. With a sly smirk, he retrieved his sword and stepped over the body of Baekchan. Steadily walking, he returned to his group. What a classy move. Not defeat. A complete defeat. Sayong! Sasuk! At that moment, all of Mount Hua's disciples ran to the center of the hall. Sasuk! Don't mess with me! Baeksang, who carefully held the unconscious Baekchan, was silent for a moment as he bowed his head. Then he turned his head to glare with a grim expression. Isn't this too much? Jin Gumryong, who was walking back to his sect, turned and looked at Baeksang. What's too much? This is just a spar. How can you injure your opponent so harshly? Spar. Isn't that exactly why he ended up like that? Jin Gumryong smiled. If this had been a battle with real swords, do you think he would simply be unconscious? It's because this was a spar that he's able to stay alive. Am I wrong? How dare you? Don't get too angry. Jin Gumryong spoke with a grin. Even I'm a bit flustered here. I didn't think he would be so weak. I thought he could at least defend himself. Maybe I expected too much. I apologize. Baek bit his lip so hard he nearly drew blood. A perfect defeat, and over-the-top mockery afterward. Baek wanted to drag that guy out and tear him apart if he could, but there was nothing Baek could do about it. Take Sahyung to the treatment hall! Right now! Yes! The Sajays holding Baekchan quickly carried him away while Baek pulled out his wooden sword. Let's see what this Southern Edge bastard's sword is worth. There's no need to refuse. Sohan. Yes, Sahyung. Face him. Yes! Jong Sohan entered the arena with a grin. Seeing him walk so leisurely, Baek tightly grasped his sword. Contrary to the oppressive atmosphere forming between the disciples, the audience was enthused and deeply interested. So astonishing. Baek was stronger than I thought, but Jin Ryang's achievements exceed my expectations. He is truly a man worthy of the praise he's received. With such a fine disciple, wouldn't the Southern Edge sect be eligible to compete with the top sects? I know! Ha ha ha! Hwang Munyak's expression went stiff. This is why they are merchants. A man was being carried away in a miserable condition, but no one paid any attention to that. The crowd was only interested in Jin Ryang and how they could grasp onto the Southern Edge sect in order to grow their wealth. Hwang Munyak isn't much different from them, but he couldn't hide his disgust at their actions in such moments. This is a disastrous defeat. Baekchan and Jin Ryang. Even if the representatives of two sects faced off, such a one-sided defeat was normally not possible. Mount Hua's momentum would halt with such embarrassing results, and morale would sink. Until the end, Baekchan never managed to land a single blow on Jin Ryang. The atmosphere was tense, thick enough to slice through with a sword. Baek lay on the ground, struggling to recover from Jong Seo-han's attack, his pride bruised even more than his body. The humiliation burned hotter than any physical pain. Get up, Baek! Baekchan's friends shouted, their voices laced with concern and anger. But all Baek could do was glare up at Jong Seo-han, seething with resentment. Not so tough now, are we? Jong Seo-han taunted, taking a step closer with a smug grin plastered on his face. Didn't you want to show everyone what the great Mount Hua is made of? Baksang's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. I'll show you what we're made of. Just wait. Jong Seo-han tilted his head mockingly. Oh, I'm quaking in my boots. He gestured at the onlookers. Look at your pathetic sect. Can't even protect their own. Mount Hua's disciples were torn between fury and desperation, their faces a mix of disbelief and shame. They had rallied behind Baekchan, believing in his potential, and now the harsh reality of their situation was glaringly clear. Chung Myung, however, seemed unbothered by the spectacle unfolding. He pushed through the grasp of his fellow disciples, his eyes narrowing as he focused on Jong Seo-han. You think you're so tough because you got lucky against a couple of our second-class disciples? You're barking up the wrong tree. Oh, is that so? Jong Seo-han laughed, the sound dripping with arrogance. What are you going to do about it? You think you can stand against me? Chung Myung took a step forward, his expression calm but fierce. I don't think. I know, and you're about to find out what happens when you underestimate Mount Hua. Is that a challenge? Jong Seo-han's grin widened. He was itching for a fight, his blood pumping at the thought of putting another Mount Hua disciple in their place. All right then, let's see what you've got. The air crackled with tension as the two squared off. It was like a match ready to ignite, and the audience was buzzing with excitement. Some placed bets on the outcome, eager to witness another display of Southern Edge sect superiority, while others silently rooted for Chung Myung. Chung Myung! Yoon Jong shouted, trying to interject some sense into the madness. Think about what you're doing. This isn't just a matter of pride. But Chung Myung waved him off, a determined glint in his eye. I'm not just fighting for pride, Sa-young. I'm fighting for our sect, for everyone who has ever doubted us. With that, he stepped into the arena, ready to prove himself. Jong Seo-han lunged first, sword slicing through the air toward Chung Myung's midsection. But Chung Myung sidestepped gracefully, his movements fluid like water. Fast, but not fast enough, Jong Seo-han sneered, twisting his body to bring the sword back around for a follow-up attack. Chung Myung smirked, drawing his wooden sword with a flourish. You're predictable. He met the incoming blow with a powerful parry, the clash of wood against wood echoing through the hall. Not bad, Jang So-han admitted, his confidence momentarily shaken. But it won't be enough. The two exchanged blows. The sound of their swords clashing filled the hall as the crowd watched in rapt attention. Chung Myung's technique was fluid, honed from countless hours of practice, while Jang So-han relied on brute force and aggression. Every time Jang So-han aimed a vicious strike, Chung Myung danced away, using his agility to his advantage. He countered with swift jabs, looking for openings in Jang So-han's guard. The audience was on the edge of their seats. "Come on, Chung Myung," one of the Mount Hua disciples shouted. "Keep it up," another added, the excitement building. Jang So-han's frustration mounted. "Why won't you just go down already?" He lashed out again, but this time, Chung Myung dodged and countered with a low sweep of his sword, catching Jang So-han off guard. Whoa! Jang So-han stumbled but quickly regained his footing. His expression turned from arrogance to surprise. "You're not just some nobody after all." Chung Myung's smirk deepened. "Told you. You're in for a fight." As the spar continued, Baek-sang watched from the sidelines, wincing at every strike Jang So-han threw. His heart raced, a mix of hope and desperation. If Chung Myung could hold his own, perhaps there was still a chance for Mount Hua to redeem itself. But the tide began to shift. Jang So-han's experience kicked in, and he began to anticipate Chung's movements. He launched a series of aggressive attacks, forcing Chung Myung to stay on the defensive. "Is that all you've got?" Jang So-han taunted, sweat glistening on his brow as he pressed the attack. "I thought you were supposed to be a genius." Chung Myung's breath was steady, but he could feel fatigue creeping in. "You're strong," he admitted, "but strength isn't everything." Then, with a sudden burst of energy, Chung Myung spun, dodging a downward strike and countering with a powerful blow aimed at Jang So-han's side. The impact sent a shockwave through the arena, and for a brief moment, it looked like he might actually land a hit. But Jang So-han managed to deflect it at the last second, grinning wider than ever. "Nice try, but you'll have to do better than that." With renewed ferocity, Jang So-han charged forward, and the two clashed once more, swords dancing as they fought for dominance. The crowd roared, divided in their loyalties, as the battle raged on. Mount Hua's disciples shouted encouragement, while the Southern Edge Sect's followers cheered for their champion. Chung Myung's determination burned bright. "I won't back down," he vowed silently to himself, refusing to let the hopes of his sect be extinguished. But the question remained, would he be able to turn the tide, or was this just the beginning of a darker fate for Mount Hua? Episode 98, I'm Not Joking Around, Sect Leader. Hyunjong just closed his eyes without saying anything. Guess silence is golden in these situations. "Shouldn't we stop this?" Hyun-sang spoke with a trembling voice. But Hyunjong couldn't answer him. Stop? How does one stop this? They were in the presence of so many influential leaders, like a high-stakes poker game where everyone's got a royal flush except you. "We can't handle the Southern Edge sect. If we continue, the children will only get injured, so it might be better to end this now." Was that what he should say? That would be a complete disgrace to Mount Hua's name. Even if Mount Hua was on the verge of collapse. No, since they were on the verge of collapse, they have something they must absolutely protect. Their name and their pride. If they were unable to safeguard their pride and the reputation of their name, then Mount Hua would no longer be a top-class sect facing ruination. They would truly become a third-rate sect, undeserving of respect. Kind of like a fast food chain that runs out of burgers. That would be the moment that Mount Hua truly collapses. Hyunjong couldn't allow that, not for the sake of his own honor, but to protect the possibility that Mount Hua could someday be revived. So, as the sect leader, he could only remain silent in this situation. However, the circumstances were so bad that even Hyun-sang, who understood Hyunjong's plight, couldn't help but speak out. Consecutive losses. 9 times in a row. They had already achieved the worst outcome of any conference yet. But the biggest issue wasn't about winning or losing, but the content of the battles. 9 disciples went forward, and not a single one of them could even touch their opponent. It was like watching a child challenge an adult. No, maybe that would be less tragic than this, more like a toddler trying to take candy from a baby. All the important leaders of Shanxi were watching. How can we handle this disgrace? Hyunjong's eyes trembled. It felt like his five viscera were being torn apart inside his body. It wasn't the humiliation that bothered him. It was the despair his disciples were experiencing. Unable to gauge the strength of their opponent, they pushed these children into this hopeless battle. Thinking of the emotional impact this would have on the children who suffered because of the incompetent elders, the sect leader wanted to chop himself to pieces. Sect leader? Hyunjong opened his eyes as he let out a sigh. This is saddening. But aren't you upset with me? It was then. Quack! The last of the second-class disciples fell to the floor as his sword fell from his hand. For a swordsman to lose their sword is a greater disgrace than death. The Southern Edge sect's disciple was so skillful that they only aimed for the wrist until they achieved their desired results. Talk about a wrist ache. I don't understand how a swordsman could let go of his sword. Doesn't Mount Hua teach you what that means? Mockery. Even with such insulting ridicule, no one could speak out. 10 consecutive losses. There was no result more disastrous than this. The faces of Mount Hua's elders were horribly contorted. Did it have to turn out like this? They thought they had finally gotten the opportunity to resurrect Mount Hua. Good things had constantly been happening lately, but they were too immersed in their dreams. They forgot how cruel reality is. In the end, Mount Hua is a martial sect. Any luxury is meaningless if it isn't supported by strength. Everyone there became keenly aware of this harsh fact. Well done. Yes, Elder. Sama-sung patted Arko on the shoulder. This result was satisfactory. Not only did everyone win, but every battle was entirely one-sided. The most encouraging aspect was that this was accomplished in full view of Shanxi's officials. Now, Mount Hua's fame will fall to the ground and never rise again. Hadn't they dreamed of this situation countless times over the past few generations? Sama-sung felt honored that he would be present to witness the sect's long-cherished desire be fulfilled. Perhaps by now, the audience understood the situation. Unsurprisingly, murmured gossip could be heard. This is too one-sided. Still, I had some expectations for Mount Hua. It seems that the past is the past, and the present is the present. Mount Hua can no longer be thought of as it was in the past. Didn't we already know that? Still, this is too miserable. In fact, I really can't tell if the Southern Edge sect is strong or if Mount Hua is just too weak. Isn't it both? A pity. So unfortunate. It seems like Mount Hua is really finished. All in vain. Sama-sung smiled as he heard it. Public opinion had shifted towards the Southern Edge sect. However, Sama-sung's purpose here wasn't to elevate the name of his sect. His goal was to send Mount Hua plummeting into the abyss. To do that, even the sprouts needed to be burned to the ground. Now, it is time to end this. Did you see what your seniors did? Yes, Elder. The third-class disciples of the Southern Edge sect looked determined. Do not hesitate. Sama-sung's eyes shone. A lion does its best even when hunting a rabbit. Do not show mercy. You need to destroy them so horribly that they never think of learning martial arts again. Yes, I will keep that in mind. Sama-sung looked up at the sky with a sly grin. Such a clear day. And such a good day, too. Yoonjong was at a loss for words. He couldn't bear to look at the second-class disciples gathered on the side. Even without seeing their expressions, he could tell how much despair they were drowning in. And it was the same for the third-class disciples. The difference between our sects is this big? The conferences held until now also ended in defeat, but it was never like this. It was never so one-sided. This conference gave off the feeling of a man casually stepping on a gathering of ants. That was when they realized that Mount Hua had never dealt with the true Southern Edge sect. Is it our turn? The faces of the third-class disciples darkened. It was true that they trained under Chung Myung, but the gap in abilities that they witnessed completely crushed their confidence. No, everyone has probably given up. That wasn't even the main problem. Yoonjong looked at Chung Myung, who was sitting next to him. And gasp! He held his breath. Crack! The sound of teeth gnashing made his heart sink. Chung Myung's face was boiling red like it would explode. Every time one of the seniors was defeated, Chung Myung's face would turn a slightly deeper shade of red. He now looked like a red plum. Seeing Chung Myung's face, Yoonjong grabbed the hem of his uniform. This bastard is going to lose control soon. 3 years in the temple, and one becomes good at reciting scripture. 3 months next to Chung Myung, and one will become a master of reading the room. Yoonjong spoke with a trembling voice. Chu, Chung Myung, let's calm down. Calm down? When Yoonjong heard Chung Myung's crooked voice, he felt his heart sink. No, he couldn't give up. This was a conference between two sects. Not just the sect leader, but the people of the Southern Edge sect and Shanxi are watching. If this guy had lost control, something even worse than the second-class disciples losing would happen. Yoonjong began to look at Chung Myung as if trying to soothe a rabid dog. Chung Myung, think carefully. Remember what you said yesterday. In order for a person to accomplish great things, patience is the most important thing. Patience. Right, patience. Sa-young. Yes, Chung Myung, I remember those words well. I've been thinking. About. Chung Myung turned his head slowly, very slowly, to the side and matched Yoonjong's gaze. And Yoonjong saw him. Chung Myung's eyes were half out of control. I. Chung Myung growled like an animal and stood up. Don't have any sense of patience in me. That isn't something to be proud of. You bastard! Unem took a deep breath. His face was pale, no longer able to handle this. He wanted to walk out and leave, but unless the sect leader instructed him, he couldn't stop. Next, we will hold the exchange of the third-class disciples. Of them. It was then. Catch him! Don't ever let go of him! Chung Myung, you're supposed to go last. People are watching. People are watching. Please, don't do this. Unem was bewildered as he looked at the third-class disciples. It seemed like they were united in trying to block someone as that person continued to push forward with glistening eyes. Chung Myung's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, palpable and chilling. The stunned silence that followed his explosive declaration seemed to stretch on forever, as if time itself had come to a halt. Onlookers blinked in disbelief, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Son Woo-ryang lay crumpled on the ground, his wooden sword rolling away from him, a mere toy in the face of such overwhelming force. The other disciples of the Southern Edge sect stood frozen, shock painted across their faces. Did that just happen? One of them murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Is that kid even human? Another gasped, eyes wide with fear and awe. Samasung's expression darkened. He had anticipated a show of strength from his disciples, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. He could feel his carefully laid plans crumbling before his eyes. Get up, Wu-ryang, he barked, his desperation creeping into his voice. Get up and fight! But Son Wu-ryang remained motionless, clearly unable to respond. The humiliation of defeat stung worse than any blow he had received, and the echoes of laughter that rang from the Mount Hua side were like daggers, twisting in his pride. Yoonjong exchanged a look with Unam, who seemed just as taken aback. Is this the Chung Myung we've trained? He's become a monster, Yoonjong whispered, struggling to comprehend the transformation. Yes, a monster, Unam admitted, his voice trembling. But it's a monster we've all needed, a savior. Chung Myung looked down at his fallen opponent, a smirk playing on his lips. Come on, is that all you've got? He taunted, his voice ringing out across the arena. I expected a challenge, norm up. His words ignited a fire in the hearts of his fellow disciples. They could see it now. Mount Hua wasn't just a shadow of its former self. It had a spark of life. They had a chance, and it was standing right in front of them. Who's next? Chung Myung called out, brimming with confidence and defiance. His fiery spirit radiated through the crowd, electrifying them, stoking the embers of their determination. The Southern Edge sect disciples exchanged anxious glances, their bravado faltering. They hadn't prepared for this. They thought they were the superior force, but now they were faced with a whirlwind that refused to be contained. Don't hesitate. Fight! Samasung commanded, pushing forward a second disciple, but he could see the fear in their eyes. I'll go. One stepped up reluctantly, trembling slightly, the bravado of earlier completely stripped away. He grasped his sword tightly, but there was a hint of hesitation in his stance. Chung Myung's eyes glinted with challenge as he regarded his new opponent. What's your name? Li Xuan, the disciple stammered. Li Xuan? Sounds good. I'll remember it when I wipe the floor with you. Chung Myung grinned, the words dripping with playful malice. Yoonjong covered his face in disbelief. Is this really the time for jokes? But Chung Myung was relentless. Let's go, Li Xuan. Show me what you've got. With a shaky breath, Li Xuan lunged forward, but Cheng Myung was faster, sidestepping with a fluid grace that seemed almost otherworldly. He countered with a swift kick that sent Li Xuan sprawling, the wooden sword flying from his grip. Too slow. Cheng Myung taunted, his laughter echoing across the arena, filling the air with a mixture of exhilaration and intimidation. Mount Hua's disciples erupted into cheers, their spirits lifted by Cheng Myung's display of power and confidence. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, hope bloomed among them. "Keep going, Cheng Myung. Show them what we're made of." Someone shouted, their voice ringing clear above the din. "Yeah, wipe that smirk off their faces," another added, the tide of morale shifting. Cheng Myung's grin widened as he faced his next opponent, the fearsome energy radiating from him. He had tasted victory, and it fueled his drive. "Who else wants to join the party?" he bellowed, his tone a mix of challenge and invitation. "Don't be shy." The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as the Southern Edge sect hesitated, their confidence shattered. They had come expecting to dominate, but now they were faced with a formidable challenger who had turned the tides with sheer will and strength. "Maybe I should start charging admission for this show," Cheng Myung quipped, basking in the attention, a mischievous spark in his eyes. Samasung clenched his fists, fury boiling beneath the surface. "This isn't over, you little brat," he hissed under his breath, knowing they had to regain control before it slipped away entirely. The atmosphere shifted again, the air thick with tension as the Southern Edge sect began to strategize. They had underestimated Mount Hua, and now they had to regroup, find their footing in the chaos that was unfolding. Cheng Myung stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. "Bring it on," he shouted, an unyielding spirit that had become the rallying cry for his sect. Mount Hua was rising from the ashes, and Cheng Myung was at the forefront, a blazing fire ready to incinerate any doubts that dared to linger. "Let's see if you can keep up," he roared, charging forward with uncontainable energy, ready to carve out a new destiny for his sect. The fight was far from over, and Cheng Myung was just getting started. Ladies and gentlemen, gather around for a spicy update. Episode 99 has officially been yanked from this video. Why, you ask? Because our main character, Cheng Myung, unleashed a beatdown on those Southern Edge bastards that was so epic it could put a WWE match to shame. Seriously, the way he handled them was like a chef flipping pancakes, just pure skill and a little bit of flair. Now, as much as I wanted to throw that glorious chaos into the mix, it just wasn't meant to be. But don't fret. You can always catch up on the action in the manhwa whenever you want. It's like having a cheat code for all that drama, just a few taps away. So dive in and enjoy the ride, because Cheng Myung is serving up justice like it's a 5-star meal. Bon appetit. Episode 100. I'm not joking around. Hun Young had a blank expression as he tilted his head. How did this just happen? He was Mount Hua's head of finance. Since he was so quick at calculating and sensitive to profit and losses, he had evaluated potential talents whenever they entered the sect. However, the current condition of the sect made it impossible for him to concentrate on his martial arts. Thanks to that, he became the weakest of the elders. Yup, the financial whiz turned martial arts noob. Because of this, it was difficult for Hun Young to understand the scene that just unfolded in front of him. Cheng Myung defeated the disciple of the Southern Edge sect overwhelmingly. What was going on? No, sect leader. Han Young, who wanted to listen to the sect leader's explanation, turned his head and flinched. Hyun Jong had an expression that Hyun Young hadn't seen on his face in decades. His eyes were wide open as if they'd fall out, with his mouth hanging low enough for a bird to fly in. Both Hyun Jong and Hyun Sang were the same. Should I also be surprised? He felt a bit upset that he couldn't understand their reactions. Huh? Hyun Jong's eyes trembled as a small voice leaked from his throat as though his soul had been stolen away. This can't be. A series of mesmerized murmurs were uttered over and over. Hyun Young gently pulled on his sleeve. Sect leader, people are watching. Get yourself together. Hyun Jong quickly shut his mouth. He was so shocked that he couldn't stop his teeth from clattering. No, seriously. He was one step away from pulling a full-on cartoon character moment here. No, that child. Hyunjong managed to calm his expression, but he couldn't repress his surging mind. He raised his trembling hand and pointed to Chung Myung. He shouldn't be like that. This makes no sense. We should have lost. In the end, Hyun Young got annoyed. What sort of abuse is that? After that child fought so valiantly, how could the sect leader say such a disgusting thing about their own disciple? But this makes no sense. It makes no sense. Hyun Sang raised his hand and rubbed his face violently, and with his frozen expression, he asked, "How long has that child been in our sect?" "Less than 6 months." "You mean that he beat a disciple of the Southern Edge sect after 6 months? And it was completely one-sided as well?" Ah, thinking like that made no sense. "Unjeom. Where's Unjeom?" "I'm here, sect leader." Unlike the others, Unjeom seemed relatively calm. "Before that child entered Mount Hua, did he learn any other martial arts?" "No. Chung Myung showed no signs of learning anything before joining." "Then, in just 6 months, he grew this much?" "Yes." Hyunjong looked at Unjeom in disbelief. "A genius." Unjeom spoke as if it wasn't a huge deal. "I'm not sure if genius suits that child. He's a child that doesn't reveal his true self. Even I haven't been able to fully understand his actions." Huh. When Hyunjong burst out in admiration, Hyunsang mumbled, "I thought geniuses and divine dragons only ever fell into other people's sects. This is like we were searching for a sack of rice in the warehouse, but a golden calf jumped out instead." Hyunjong was shocked. "I thought he was just a wealth bringer, but..." His mumbling represented the feeling of everyone who was watching. How much has Chung Myung done for Mount Hua already? He didn't need to have any martial arts talent at all. Chung Myung is only human. It wouldn't be appropriate to get greedy and try to force unrealistic expectations onto a child that's done so much for them. But didn't this situation show that he had an outstanding talent as well? Enough to take down a disciple from the Southern Edge so easily? When everyone was shocked, Hun Young quickly moved. "Anyway, we got the win. Doesn't this save our face?" Hyunjong and Hyunsang dumbfoundedly turned their heads. Hun Young grew angry and felt that the elders were acting absurd. Coughing, he spoke and tried to clear the awkward atmosphere. "For now, he saved our face. For now." Seriously, this is why the finance head should properly learn martial arts. You are the only one who can speak so casually in this absurd situation. Hansang joked with Hyunyoung, who felt it was an unfair assessment. Hyunjong lightly smiled and looked away toward Chungmyung. "Saved our face." Could it be said so simply? Perhaps. The outcome of today's conference may not matter at all. It was possible that Mount Hua had just acquired a talent that could carry the sect for the next 100 years. Mount Hua's child seems to have won. Looks like it. But wasn't that too one-sided? Oh, this was quite unexpected. Hwang Munyak was relaxed as he enjoyed listening to the reactions around him. Of course, he should act out like that. Hwang Munyak didn't know how strong Chung Myung was. He wasn't even conscious when the Unha Guild events were settled by that child. He had been told that a single hit from Lee Song-bak was enough for Chung Myung to cough up blood, but he didn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. That child was too insidious. He must have been playing the victim to capture the culprit. For Hwang Munyak, Chung Myung was an unknown element. However, the reason he could watch and remain relaxed was that there's no way that young brat would underestimate his opponent and entertain a loss. It wasn't like he knew Chung Myung very well, but he was the man whose eye for appraisal built the Unha Guild up to its current level. In his eyes, Chung Myung stepped ahead with confidence, which meant he was strong enough to ensure victory. Of course, this was a more radical result than what Hwang Munyak expected. Right, this isn't a lost cause. That much is clear. Is this conference a battleground for Chung Myung? Then the results may be different from what everyone expects. There are talents in Mount Hua too. Considering the age, it's a great display. No, great wouldn't be enough to suffice. The Southern Edge sect's disciples can't be defeated with luck alone, and that was the best of the third-class disciples. Wasn't there a big difference between them too? To take the lead so confidently, that child was surely an outstanding talent from the Southern Edge sect, but it was completely one-sided. The conversation between the merchants and officials sounded like a melodious song to Hwang Munyak. However, Hwang Munyak didn't miss these voices' extraordinary heat. It was hard to hear praises for the Southern Edge sect anymore, but there was also no one there who hadn't set their sights on Chung Myung. Don't even dream about it. He is the fish I caught. With one hit, Chung Myung managed to get more attention than Jin Gyum Ryong. No matter how this conference of sects ended, the name of Chung Myung would now spread throughout Shanxi. Yunjong stood firm, the air thick with anticipation. He could feel the weight of eyes upon him, both those of his fellow disciples and the spectators from the Southern Edge sect. This is it, he thought. No backing down now. As he stared down his opponent, the disciple from the Southern Edge sect stepped forward, a tall figure with a confident grin that screamed arrogance. The crowd murmured in excitement, clearly favoring the Southern Edge disciple, but Yunjong remembered the cheers for Chung Myung, the renewed spirit of Mount Hua. He wouldn't let that spirit fade. The referee stepped between them, raised his hand, and called for silence. Ready? Fight! The moment the signal was given, Yunjong charged forward, drawing on all the training he'd endured over the years. He aimed a quick slash at the opponent's midsection, but the Southern Edge disciple parried effortlessly, smirking as he pushed Yunjong back. Is that all you've got, Mount Hua? He taunted, circling Yunjong like a predator. Yunjong clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling within. You won't be smiling for long. He pivoted, feinting to the left before launching a powerful kick toward the disciple's knee. Caught off guard, the disciple stumbled and Yunjong seized the opportunity. He followed up with a flurry of strikes, forcing the disciple to defend with all his might. Whoa! Look at him go! One of the spectators exclaimed, their voice cutting through the tension. Yunjong's heart raced as he felt the crowd's energy boosting his own. He could hear Chung Myung's voice echoing in his head. If you can see their face, you can slap it. Taking a deep breath, he focused, letting the adrenaline guide him. With renewed determination, he unleashed a combination of strikes, each one aimed with precision. The Southern Edge disciple barely managed to block them, but the mounting pressure was evident. Not bad, but you'll have to do better, the disciple spat, anger flashing in his eyes. Yunjong wasn't done. He summoned all the confidence he could muster and executed a spinning kick, catching the disciple squarely on the side of the head. The impact echoed, and the crowd gasped in unison. Yes! The Mount Hua disciples cheered, their voices ringing out like a chorus of hope. The Southern Edge disciple stumbled, disbelief etched across his face as he regained his footing. You! How dare you! Yunjong smirked, enjoying the shift in power. You're in my territory now. The two squared off again, but this time, Yunjong felt different. The fear that had gripped him earlier melted away. With each movement, he became more fluid, more attuned to his body. Suddenly, the disciple lunged, attempting a powerful strike, but Yunjong anticipated it. He sidestepped, using the momentum to deliver a quick counterattack to the disciple's ribs. The blow sent his opponent staggering back, gasping for air. Mount Hua! The crowd erupted, their voices invigorating Yunjong. But the Southern Edge disciple wasn't finished. He rallied, fury igniting his movements as he launched a series of wild swings. Yunjong dodged, weaving and ducking, then countering with quick jabs that forced his opponent on the defensive. Is that all you've got? Yunjong taunted, echoing the earlier jeer. The disciple growled, frustration evident, but that only spurred him on. He roared, launching himself at Yunjong with reckless abandon. In the chaos, Yunjong felt a surge of inspiration. In one decisive moment, he dropped low, sweeping the Southern Edge disciple's feet out from under him. The disciple crashed to the ground, and Yunjong wasted no time. He leapt atop his opponent, pinning him down with a triumphant grin. Yield! He shouted, adrenaline coursing through him. The referee rushed in, signaling the end of the match as the Southern Edge disciple lay panting beneath him, hands raised in defeat. Yunjong stood up, heart racing, and raised his arms to the crowd. The cheers erupted, drowning out all doubt. Mount Hua! Mount Hua! They chanted, their voices like a tidal wave of triumph. As he stepped back, the reality of what he'd accomplished settled in. He had fought not just for himself, but for the entire sect's honor. Turning, he caught Chung Myung's eye, who was grinning like a madman. See? You didn't even need to slap anyone! Chung Myung shouted, laughter in his voice. Shut up! Yunjong replied, unable to suppress his own smile. As he walked off the arena, the rush of victory filled him. Mount Hua was rising, and they were doing it together. Chungmyung might have been the catalyst, but each of them was part of a new chapter for the sect, one where they no longer cowered but faced challenges head-on. As the next match was called, Yoonjong knew it was time to keep that momentum going. The winds of change were blowing favorably for Mount Hua, and he was ready to seize every opportunity that came their way. Who's next? He thought, eager to see how far they could go. The Southern Edge sect had no idea what they were up against.